And I think, yeah, we are live. Welcome, everybody, to our 10-minute advice session with Phyllis Fagell. We are talking again about teens and tweens, mainly tweens, today. And Phyllis is a licensed clinical professional counselor, school counselor, journalist, and author of Middle School Matters, and a new book that's coming out soon. And we are talking about the aftermath of COVID today. Probably you've all seen in the news this weekend that we got the nation's report card, and it looks academically dire. But it might even be worse when we look at the social emotional state of our middle schoolers. Phyllis, talk us a little bit through what's happening.
Sure. It's nice to see you and everyone who joins us. I definitely think we have to start with that social and the emotional piece. I can completely understand that desire to go straight to fixing all of the academic, quote unquote deficits. But if you think about the age group, their number one priority is that social piece. And if we don't figure out how to leverage their need for that social piece in the service of learning, if we don't focus on that first and the emotional needs that they have, I think we've seen lots of stories in the last few months and years about the dire state of kids' mental health. The rest of it won't fall into place. It can't fall into place unless we address those other components first.
Mm-hmm. We did reach out to our followers on social media, and we asked them what are their teens and tweens struggle with most. And our question was, we categorized it as, is it about making friends or keeping old friends, staying organized and on top of schoolwork? Are your kids engaging in extracurriculars, and perfectionism, or struggling with making mistakes? And the results were all over the place, but there was a little bit of a trend to staying organized. But maybe we can kind of, since you had identified those groups for us, can we kind of tackle them one by one, why this might be so much harder after COVID?
Sure. It's interesting to me that organization came up as the biggest need. I would suspect that if we asked kids themselves to answer that question, we might get different answers. They might be more focused on the social challenges. And when I put that into the poll, it really was far-reaching. Are they having trouble with social skills? Are they having trouble entering a conversation? Are they having trouble knowing who their friends are? Are they having trouble reaching out and having the ability to take a risk and sit at a lunch table maybe with people they don't know? So that social piece is so far-reaching. But I think what parents are noticing, maybe even more than kids, is that organizational piece, the executive functioning, which, by the way, executive functioning skills, that ability to predict how your work product today, the work effort today impacts your product tomorrow, doesn't even kick in until around age 14. And so parents think their kids are being lazy, and they're not. They really do need a lot of support staying organized. And add on top of that, the fact that everybody's nervous systems have been so overtaxed for a few years, that they have all of these competing demands, that they're trying to catch up on academics and figure out where they fit into that social hierarchy. And it makes a lot of sense to me that kids are a little more disorganized even than they would be typically.
How does that kind of go together though with perfectionism? I would actually think that, in areas where I see myself being a perfectionist, that's where I'm over organized. That's where I kind of really try to have everything lined up neatly.
That's a really good question. And I think perfectionism is often misunderstood. There are some people for whom perfectionism looks like that. They perseverate, they erase and rewrite, they stay up until 1 a.m. working on something until it's perfect. Mm-hmm. They're totally on top of what's due and when. And then there are other people whose perfectionism shows up as avoidance. The desire to be perfect is so overwhelming, or the fear, and perfectionism really is about fear, the fear that if you put forth your best effort. And best is also a word that's really scary to a perfectionist, because there's no such thing as doing your best. Their best is never their best. There's always that higher echelon that they could hit. And so if you fall into that category, it might show up as avoidance. You might not get started at all. You might skip a class or not go to a class where you're afraid that if they call on you, you'll get the wrong answer. You might be disorganized because you don't even want to look at your calendar and see what you haven't done. So it can show up in that way as well.
That makes sense. And what about the part about making or keeping friends? Why do you think COVID had an impact on that?
There's a tremendous amount of churn in these years anyway, socially.
Yeah.
So you have kids who are coming out of elementary school, often being grouped in with lots of new kids. They're maturing at different rates. So some kids have crushes and are using makeup, and other kids and are going through puberty early, and other kids are still playing with their dolls and their stuffed animals and feel very almost melancholy about moving on to those teen years. And so sometimes friendships that were really solid can move apart just because they're in such different places, and that's hurtful. Also, there's just that desire to pull away from your parents. It's a developmental imperative to start spending more time with your friends. And COVID disrupted all of that. So if you think about all the different age groups, I would argue that middle schoolers socially were impacted the most, because it is the biggest developmental imperative for them to start that process of pulling away from their parents and spending more time with friends. And this is an age where they're really insecure and they're really keenly aware of how they stack up to everyone around them. And so even if you felt somewhat confident at the start of the pandemic about where you were in that social pecking order, if you then left and you didn't have that daily reassurance, you didn't have those organic interactions, you didn't get the reassurance that you needed, that you were still in that same place, and then you come back and everyone looks different and they're older and there's been so much time since you last had those daily in-person interactions. Plus, a lot of schools had cohorts where they divided the kids into different groups, which created these artificial differences in peer groups. Put that all together and then they come back, and I think that it just heightens all of that insecurity. It exacerbates all of the churn that already is happening in those years.
Right. So the last part, which I find really interesting because it is about how engaged or interested are your teens and tweens in extracurricular activities outside of school. And we got a few comments that said, yes, they might do less, but isn't that a good thing? Wasn't it that COVID was an interrupter that actually says slow down? We are all over scheduled, so are our kids. And so, some parents might argue this was good, that kind of all the extracurriculars were scaled down to zero, and now you could actually really consider and think about where you want, how much you want your kid to engage in. And maybe we can put up one of the comments on the screen.
I agree with that poster, the person who made that comment. I do think it's an opportunity to really evaluate how kids are doing and what their stamina is. I think so many of them, their stamina is down. Even kids falling asleep during the school day, with kids for whom that's not characteristic at all, or kids who used to be able to do lots of different activities, finding that it's all they can do to get through the school day and do their homework. Maybe they can take on one or two activities at most after school. And I think that creates some anxiety for some parents who wonder if it's a good thing, a bad thing, if it's something they should even be worried about, if their child suddenly isn't interested in the same activities. And I use the metaphor of the rocks, pebbles, and sand. So if the rocks are the things you have to do, things like sleep and school, and those are the have to do's. And then the pebbles are the should do's. So it might be sports practice, or if you have an after school job or a babysitting job. And then the want to do's are things like playing video games and hanging out with friends. And if you work backwards, if you fill your jar with all those want to do's, or if you're doing lots of little tiny activities that take up bits of your time, and you put that sand in, you find that you can't then add the rocks and the pebbles. And so really helping kids take a look at their schedule, curate it, prune it as needed, figure out what they're really interested in, and recognizing that perfect might be the enemy of the good. Maybe they don't want to give up. Maybe they are overwhelmed by travel soccer, but they would still want to play in a rec league. Or maybe they want to take a break from it and come back from it later. Or maybe they want to try something else entirely. And I think in the middle school years in particular, pandemic or not, it's a really important time to let kids do that kind of experimentation and figure out what it is that they like, rather than constantly telling them what and how much they should be doing.
Right. Oh, perfect. Well, we're already over 10 minutes. Thank you so much, Phyllis, for 3 weeks of wisdom. And we hope to see you soon again.
Thank you. So nice to talk to you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.